Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all here, and thanks for joining us this morning for ED Now. I am so pleased to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Jay Garner. Jay is the president and founder of Gardner Economics. He has a 40-year career in economic development where he's known as an innovator and thought leader, generally an all-around good guy. An indicator of this, in 2015, Jay was identified as one of 10 people who made a difference in economic development. He is a former president of the International Economic Development Council, and recently, along with Ross Patton, he has brought some exciting discussion to the field of economic development with his book, Economic Development is Not for Amateurs. I'm not going to go through the rest of his profile. I'll post that in the chat box. And before I introduce Jay, let me just tell you that we'll be taking questions at the end of Jay's presentation, and please post your questions in the chat box below. So without further ado, Jay, welcome to Ohio again.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone from Atlanta, Georgia. It's great to be with everyone this morning. And I have to do my perfunctory Southern accent and welcome by saying, good morning, y'all. And that will be the extent of my Southern accent while I get through this presentation today. So thank you for having me. I do also want to thank, again, Spectrum for serving as the sponsor of this keynote session, and also Ohio Electric Cooperatives and my good friend Dennis Minyar for being the book sponsor. So it's my understanding that those who have registered will receive a signed copy of my book, and I want to thank Dennis and OEC for offering that as an amenity for your participation. So Mark is right. I have been in the economic development world for this is my fourth decade now. I just started my 40th year this month in January, and I have been on two sides of the fence. I have been an economic development practitioner running regional and local economic development programs, primarily through the Southeast, like Mobile, Alabama, Asheville, North Carolina, and Tampa, Florida, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And then for the last 18 years, I have had my own business, Gardner Economics, which is a boutique firm. There are 5 of us based in Atlanta, Georgia, but with representative offices both in North Carolina and in Florida. And so we not only help communities and states and regions create effective economic development strategies, but we also work with companies on their site location initiatives, and we help these companies find optimal sites really throughout the globe, but primarily in North America. And our specialty is in the food and beverage processing sector and in distribution, which Ohio has a strong, successful history in both of those sectors. So how did this book even come about? A few years ago, my firm did an economic development strategy in Covington, Kentucky, which is just across the river from Cincinnati. And I got to meet Ross Patton there, who is now the Associate Director of Economic Development for the city of Covington. And when we finished with our project after about 7 months, Ross reached out to me and he said, you know, I have this idea. I would love to write a book, and I wanted to see if you would partner with me because I'm finding it very frustrating in dealing with a number of my constituents, their comprehension and their understanding of all of the nuances of economic development. And I told Ross, I said, well, actually, working with the non-economic development professionals, the people who affect policy every day, elected officials, high-level volunteers, has been a passion of mine for a long, long time. And I would love to partner with you on this book. So we embarked on that effort in actually October of 2019. We finished this book in the summer of 2020, and we published it on August the 4th. We didn't know if we would have 50 readers or 500. We just didn't know how to manage the expectations. So just for my own mental health, I kind of set the bar low, and would have been very pleased to sell a couple hundred books. To date, we have sold over 2,500 throughout the US, Canada, and some in Europe. And so we are beyond thrilled with the recognition that it has received. And we very much appreciate Mark Barbash, Dennis Minyar, and other groups in Ohio that have bought large quantities of this book to use as a training guide for the non-economic development practitioner. So let me get right into it. And we have 7 chapters on this. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to hit some highlights on each of these chapters. And then Mark is going to capture questions that we have. And I know we have some time set aside to answer those questions. So let's get right into it and get into the first chapter. And that is effective leadership equals community prosperity. So there is one common denominator that I have seen in the many years that I have been doing economic development, and that is the quality of your public and private leadership drives economic development success. So I see this really much more often as a location advisor, because we travel all over North America, all over the United States, in trying to identify these optimal sites. And without a doubt, we're able to see that the winners and losers of these communities based on their product is driven by leadership, you know. And so we have a number of examples in our book, like Chattanooga, Tennessee, which at one time in the 70s was recognized as having the dirtiest air in America and is now a model for sustainability. Or Greenville, South Carolina, which has evolved from a textile community to one of the premier corporate destinations in the United States. And so then with that is the second component of this chapter that I think is so important, and that is certainty, simplicity, and speed are really the 3 tenets that drive the successful communities. What do we mean by that? Well, speed to market, which I'll talk about a little bit later in another chapter, is extremely important. And so when a company is going through the permitting process, the regulatory process, understanding that the rules aren't going to be changed, or that you're not going to have a number of government bureaucrats that are going to make decisions more subjectively rather than objectively, you know? So when I first got into this business 40 years ago, the average time that it took a company from when they started to look until they announced was somewhere around 18 months. Today, it's more like 6 months. So speed to market is huge. Case in point, and I heard the discussion about Carvana, which appears that it took a very short time, but also Tesla and their announcement last year in rural Austin, Texas, Travis County, basically took 6 months from start to finish. And on the day they announced in August, they were turning dirt on that mega site 1 week later. So certainty, simplicity, and speed, without a doubt, are key components driving successful economic communities. If I was asked, what's the most important chapter in a book? That's almost like saying, you know, what child do you like the best? But I have always been a big proponent of product. Then I heard you all mention this morning your new product initiative, OSEP. And so you can't do enough to engage product development. And so I've been fortunate these last 18 years where a number of my people that work with me have worked with me for a long time. And as a result of that, I think I've annoyed them with my different sayings that they call J-isms over the years. One of them we trademarked, and that is no product, no project. And it's just as simple as that. You cannot sell from an empty wagon. You have to have the infrastructure, the sites, the buildings, the utilities that allow for a site to actually be considered a industrial or commercial site. So you have to have that in place. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels. And by having a product development fund, as I heard about this morning from Bill's opening comments, that is an amazing, wonderful thing. So speed to market, I had mentioned earlier, extremely important in today's world. Companies want to get into operation quickly so that they can start making a profit. And so they're looking at these different opportunities. About 85% of all of our searches start out with the company that we're dealing with saying, we would love to be able to find an existing building, but they typically can't. And as a result of that, it turns into a greenfield site, especially in the food and beverage sector. So you need to have your industrial parks, you need to have your industrial sites, your office parks, all of those things put together. Otherwise, again, you're going to be selling from an empty wagon and there'll be nothing to buy. You need to make sure that you have that long-term sustainable funding source for economic development. And I think what Ohio has done with Jobs Ohio and how they have modeled that process through the sale of alcohol is very innovative, extremely successful as it relates to raising the bar for you all. I've also used extensively for years the Texas model of economic development, because in 1979, the Texas legislature said, we think local communities can do a better job in doing economic development than the state telling them how to do it. So they created a sustainable funding source for communities that voted in a 0.5% sales tax for economic development. As a result of that, small communities of 10, 12, 15,000 people that have a Walmart got very resource rich, because a 0.5% sales tax derives a lot of revenue. And as a result of that, they've been able to create a lot of product. Team Neo for years has exemplified the mantra that I use of market yourself regionally, but you sell yourself locally. And what we mean by that is companies look at regions first because of the labor draw. Typically, when we're doing a site search for a company, they're looking at somewhere between a 30 to 45-minute drive time. And you have 18 counties in the Team Neo area, which is a very diverse geography. You have urban, you have rural, you have large population areas, and you have small population areas. And so really in today's environment, in my estimation, you have the complete package, especially during the pandemic when all of our survey work. So one thing that Mark did not mention, when I say our survey work, I am the current chair of a consortium of global site location consultants, and our organization is called the Site Selectors Guild. And we're an 11-year-old organization. There are 55 of us now representing boutique firms like mine, or global firms like Deloitte, CBRE, JLL, Colliers, companies like that. So we survey our membership, who in turn is talking to our corporate clients. And because of the pandemic, there was a strong shift, especially with work from home protocols, where there is less desire right now to be in the large urban environment, and a stronger desire to be in a more suburban or tier 2 or rural community. Public safety has a big role on that. You know, when public safety is a key quality of life, quality of place consideration, and we look at all of the civil unrest that has occurred over these last several months, that has a major impact on investment decisions, which is why you've seen significant outmigration of places like New York, Illinois, California, all to the benefit of places like Texas, Florida, and in some areas, Georgia. So it is very, very important about companies looking at regions first and then paring it down on the local level. So that's why we say you market yourself regionally, but you sell yourself locally. And so a regional group should never supplant a local group. Instead, you work in tandem together. It's very expensive to market yourself globally, to tell the world about your community. But an organization like Team Neo can do that very effectively. So keep that partnering going on between regional groups and the local groups. So the other thing I want to mention in here too is the entity that controls the dirt also controls the project. So that's the reason why it's very important for you to make sure that you use that product development fund to create these industrial parks and these office parks, the product that will allow it to occur. Tourism, depending on the community, the hospitality sector is a significant impact of economic opportunity. So it just depends on the community, and don't forget that. Now, right now, the hospitality sector, the service sector is going through a world of hurt, but it will change, especially when there is more widespread utilization of the COVID vaccination. In the 1990s, I ran the Asheville, North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. We had 45 people in the chamber on staff at that time, little Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina. But of those 45, 30 of them were in our Convention and Visitor Bureau, which was part of the chamber. And we had a hospitality tax of 3%, which derives significant revenue for us to promote the community. And so just the tourism budget on an annual basis back then was between $5 and $6 million a year. That's more than some states have as it relates to a tourism budget. So we mention that because, remember, tourism does help create and identify a community brand. And I'm going to talk about branding in just a second. Labor is always, always a key consideration, and probably more so as a result of what's going on in today's world with COVID. So I have gone, in my 40 years, I have gone through 2 full employment cycles. The first was in 1999 when we had the dot-com bubble. That was a full employment cycle. The second one was in early 2019, and a lot of 2019 actually, when we had a full employment cycle. Every HR person that we would talk with around the country said, we can't find skilled labor, help us. And it was a problem. Now, in today's COVID world, we don't have a people shortage as much as we still have a skills shortage. And for years, I always thought community colleges and technical schools were the unsung heroes of economic development workforce training. They finally got the attention they deserved about 5 years ago. But the more that we can do to work with our academic institutions, 2-year colleges, technical school, our 4-year colleges, what we're doing in public school with career academies, career pathways, apprenticeships, internships, anything that we can do where academia and business partner and are on the same page to build the talent pipeline and to fill those skill void is a wonderful thing that will differentiate you for years ahead. It's probably the most challenging component because quite frankly, academia can be extremely bureaucratic. And I tell them that all the time. And the majority of them will agree with me. But those that are more adaptive and flexible, especially on that technical school and community college side, are really seeing significant gains in creating the talent pipeline. My book partner, Rawls Patton, wrote these next few chapters. And the first one is Grow Your Garden, which we're talking about really the entrepreneurial component of any community. And look, the vast majority of all jobs that are created in the United States are from small businesses, and those basically come from entrepreneurs. Sadly, about 80% of all new businesses fail in the first 5 years. They have a wonderful idea, but they may not have the skills to actually run, start, or operate a business. So whatever communities can do to help that entrepreneurial ecosystem with makerspace, with venture capital, with angel capital, with any kind of direction to help these entrepreneurs with these beautiful, brilliant ideas that can be executed and implemented effectively is a wonderful thing. And then remember too, you need to make sure that you're diversifying. So in the 80s and 90s, I ran economic development in Mobile, Alabama. When I moved to Mobile in 1985, there were 2 large paper mills in that community that combined employed about 5,000 people. Today, there is no paper made in Mobile, Alabama. Instead, that has been replaced now with shipbuilding, which is a significant job creator, and aircraft assembly. Airbus has a major wide body assembly plant in Mobile. So all clusters basically have a life to them. And it, you know, at some point, a particular cluster may just fade away. I'm starting to see that now in California with the out-migration of technology. And that's because of their business climate, you know, and Elon Musk is a great example of bringing almost everything, including his household, out of California and moving it to another state or states. We're seeing that in other sectors too. We're seeing that in New York in the office operations sector, where Goldman Sachs moving significant operations to Texas and to Florida. So I mention that because you do not want to get comfortable with a long sector, industry sector that could easily go away. And that could also be in the military sector, especially when BRAC comes up again. That's the Base Realignment Commission that's looking at, do we keep this base? Do it go away? What do we do with it? That could happen to anything, any base, especially in Ohio. So make sure also, lastly, that you are on the front end on incentives. I don't think incentives are ever going to go away. Every time the National Governors Association would meet, governors would say, enough of these incentives, enough. Let's put a moratorium on them. And then the next big marquee project would come along and they would all try to outdo each other because they're being measured on job creation. So instead, you got to make sure you're doing incentives smartly, with clawback provisions, with economic impact analyses, with return on investment analyses to make sure that it's a good deal for the taxpayer of your community. And then time kills deals. So I am an economic developer. When I was in grad school, I had a focus on being a planner. So you can say that I am a reformed planner. Planners do what they need to do. That's their job. They need to do what they're responsible to do, and that's to protect the environment and the fabric of a community. Okay. I always say that economic developers are doers and planners are regulators. And when they're able to work together as a team and have a culture of yes, rather than a culture of no, that's when you're going to see communities continue to flourish and succeed, rather than by playing the turf wars and not being adaptive and flexible. So chapter 7 is all about the brand. And I think that Team NEO has done a magnificent job over the years as an example of trying to build that brand. Now you have 18 counties, and the last time I remembered, I haven't looked, and my apologies, I think you had 4 MSAs. And so you have a lot of geography to build a brand. And I remember when you used to have the Cleveland Plus brand. So branding is very important. Everybody remembers I love New York. I don't know who loves New York today. Everyone remembers Virginia is for lovers. They're still using that. You got to be careful on how you use the brand. Minot, North Dakota, this is lore. I think it's true. Years ago, came up with the brand Why Not Minot, and somebody very cleverly immediately came out and said reason freezing. So they got rid of that brand immediately upon its delivery. So you just have to be careful on how you present yourself to the public, but branding is extremely important so that it captures the attention of your potential investors or your talent that needs to move to your community or the population as a whole. And then lastly, we borrowed this quote from the legendary Jack Welch, who was the chair of GE when GE was a well-run company. And he said, control your own destiny or someone else will. And so what we mean by that, of course, is do what you can, work in collaboration with others, but do not rely on others to be your savior. Take that lead, be a leader, and make sure that collaboration is great. You've got to have it, but always work to control that your own destiny. And here we are in a crisis. March and April were horrible times for lots of us, my company included. Just stunningly, the fourth quarter of last year turned out to be one of our best quarters ever. I deal with a lot of contractors, a lot of architectural and engineering firms. Those contractors that I deal with by and large are industrial contractors, and they have shared with me, many of them have had the largest profits and sales in their company history last year, because there are certain sectors that have just done exceptionally well in manufacturing and distribution. Then we have, sadly, areas that have just been decimated, like in the hospitality area where I live in suburban Atlanta. I'm in a Delta Airlines enclave. A lot of my neighbors have been furloughed because they're related to either being a pilot or a flight attendant or working in some capacity at one of the airlines. And so you can see an example of how that has had an impact. But with that adversity comes opportunity, which is what we saw in many aspects last year with these companies that are having significant profits. I have told a number of people jokingly, though it's not that funny of a joke really, that gosh, being an industrial contractor, being a home builder, because in many locations, home building permits are just off the charts, with people trying to get out of urban environments and more into a suburban or rural area, or being a divorce attorney has done exceptionally well last year, because we have seen, I've read a number of publications where divorce attorneys were just making a killing when people were in lockdown. They didn't particularly like being in lockdown with who they were in lockdown with. So then they got busy. With any event, there comes the adversity and then the opportunity with it. So with that, and I'll tell all of the leaders that are on this Zoom presentation today, and that is, you need to lead, follow, or get out of the way. I hope that you'll continue to be leaders. If that's not your personality, then obviously follow, but let the leaders or the followers try to get economic success for their community, and that's why we say get out of the way. So with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you and see what questions that we have.
Jay, thanks very much. Very, very highly relevant, particularly these days, as we're all trying to understand what comes next. We've got a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to you. The first one is how important is having a published countywide incentives package for both incumbent businesses and attraction for new businesses?
I think it's extremely important. You want to have a plan. You want to be able to create the ground rules of what companies, whether they're an existing company or a potential new company, should be able to expect, rather than just the subjective nature of it. So work diligently to create a plan, as long as you have that economic impact analysis with it. You know, one of your colleges may be able to help you with that. There are consultants out there that can help you with that, but create that incentive plan.
Thanks very much. Next question, Jay, what kinds of conversations are you and your peers in site selection having on ways that diversity, equity, and inclusion might play a greater role in location analysis?
Well, I think it's being driven obviously by companies. And so when companies are telling us what they must have to have, what they want to have, they're always talking about talent, and diversity and inclusion is a key consideration of that. You know, and there's actually some measurements now that we use that talk about the index from diversity and inclusion. Wallet Hub has something like that, that looks at the size of an LGBTQ community as an example. But it's not going to go away. It's just going to profoundly grow as it relates to companies making sure that they're showing folks that they're being diverse and inclusive in their hiring practices. That then translates down to us when we're doing our search on their behalf.
Jay, we've got a number of elected officials joining us here this morning. Could you talk a little bit about the role of the elected official in the economic development business?
Well, first of all, I want to thank them for participating, and I say that in all sincerity because, in my opinion, I think the elected official is the most important person in the economic development process. I really, really do. And I say that because that individual drives policy. And policy, if it's good policy, you're going to have successful economic development. If it's poor policy, it's going to drive it out. And so I encourage all of my elected official friends that I talk with all the time to make sure that you're looking at policies that drive economic opportunity and economic vitality for your citizens and for your community. Otherwise, you're going to have a world of hurt as it relates to driving growth. So I'm just thrilled that they're involved today, and I see that there's a lot of people, over 206 that are participants today, many of who are elected officials, so that's great.
Jay, one of the biggest programs, or at least a program that's gotten a lot of attention recently, has been opportunity zones.
Yeah.
And they've had some changes in timelines because of COVID. Could you talk a little bit about how you're seeing opportunity zones being used in economic development?
It's not being used as proactively and aggressively as I thought it would be. I'm not sure. I don't know why. It's a great opportunity. There are some positive tax consequences, tax credits that are associated with it. I think that economic developers and municipalities can do a more effective job in promoting it and presenting it. The other issue is right now, you basically have free money as it relates to any loans that companies may get. And so the desire and the demand for an opportunity zone may not be as strong as if interest rates were higher. You know, we're getting ready to, I think, get into an inflationary mode, Mark. And as a result, when inflation goes up, I think you're going to see some of these financial incentive tools that are going to capture more interest.
And for those folks who are interested in opportunity zones, I'd recommend that you contact our friends at Team NEO. In addition, the Council of Development Finance Agencies has a wealth of information about opportunity zones. Okay, next question. Do you recommend that economic developers get involved in a community planning process, such as playing a major role in the development of a CEDS, a comprehensive economic development strategy, or working with local jurisdictions on their plans?
Yeah, they absolutely should. I mean, it's part of that team sport. So we're working with a community now where in South Carolina, and the planning department is doing a comprehensive economic development strategy. The economic development group was only involved in the periphery, and it didn't make any sense on why they weren't, because any CEDS is going to have a land use component to it. And so they're going to look at long range opportunity for creating new product where infrastructure should be placed. And so, gosh, that is a key component of any economic development department, any function, to work in tandem and make sure that you're all on the same page.
And I'm sure you'd also agree, Jay, that that kind of economic or SEDS has to be both strategic and flexible to kind of change with conditions as they change and new opportunities come up in your community.
Absolutely. You have to be adaptive and flexible and everything. I mean, gosh, look what happened with COVID. I mean, you know, everyone pivoted and turned on a dime that is now succeeding or flourishing. But even before COVID, I'd have corporate clients, Mark, that would spend 5, 6, 7, $8 million on product development initiatives for their, you know, for a product that they're going to sell. Okay. And then something would change with consumer or customer preference. And they would realize that's not going to sell. So they would throw it out. They'd spend 6, 8, $10 million, realize that if they went out and spent $500 million, it would be a bad thing. So they would just pivot and turn because they were adaptive and flexible based on market conditions. Works the same way with communities.
And I think that comes back to your earlier comment about knowing what kind of product you have to offer to businesses and being really up to date on what's happening in other communities and frankly, communities that you may be competing with for business locations.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Jay, as we're sitting here staring into our screens, we have a highly relevant question. Are there any tools that you found particularly useful for conducting virtual site visits or winning projects in a more virtually dependent site selection process?
So what the Site Selectors Guild has been saying, and we've surveyed our members and we've had webinars that have discussed this, we're really seeing a transition to a hybrid approach. So, and we were seeing that even before the pandemic. What we mean by that is there are so many more online tools that we can use now, from data analysis to, you know, utilizing various GIS components, looking at Google Earth and all of that. At the end of the day, on site location, Mark, you still have to kick the dirt. You still have to go and visit the site and perform that due diligence. Otherwise, it's not a complete picture. And so that's why we're saying focus on a hybrid. You're going to see a lot of upfront work, virtual. On that second phase, you're still going to see people come and take a look and kick that dirt, as I say. But there are a number of different tools, without giving them a free advertisement, that help with labor analyses and also cost analyses. So they're out there and they're just growing and growing.
Jay, we have so many questions here, and unfortunately, not enough time to ask them all. For those folks who've asked questions that we haven't been able to get to, we'll definitely forward them on to Jay. Let me just finish off, Jay, by asking you to comment on how well Northeast Ohio competes. Northeast Ohio has made significant investment over the past few years in economic development, both programs and leadership and folks who are on the ground. How well do we compete?
I think you compete very effectively, and I'll give you a couple of different examples. First of all, the staff of Team NEO is getting out and calling on location advisors like me. They're calling on targeted industries. I see them all the time. Before the pandemic, the Site Selectors Guild is getting live back in person beginning in February. But I would see the Team NEO staff all the time doing an effective job presenting the value proposition of Northeast Ohio. That's number one. Number two, I think that you're obviously creating the programs to compete effectively, like the OSEP program, okay, that Bill had mentioned earlier. I think that's a key consideration. The Northeast Ohio that I see today versus the Northeast Ohio that I've been to 10, 12 years ago on business is not the same. And then really to finally answer your question, Mark, the economic impact results that Bill presented earlier this morning speaks volumes. And that says a lot about how much and how aggressive Northeast Ohio is competing. Don't let the foot off of the gas. That's the key. Don't ever become complacent and keep charging ahead.
Jay, thanks so much for being with us here this morning. On behalf of the Ohio Economic Development Association and our friends in economic development, we really appreciate your taking the time both to represent Ohio well as to join us this morning.